Hey coders, welcome back to another Node project. This time I'm going to continue with my Node React project that I did previously, and I'm going to connect a Mongo database to it. So if you want to follow along, you can download my code from github.com, but if you don't want to, you can completely follow this by just watching the video, and I think you should be okay with understanding how databases work with Node and React. So let's go ahead and finish up this project. Okay, so starting off right here, I have Visual Studio Code open. If you remembered from my previous project, we were working in our sandbox using Node React app. This is the previous project. I'm going to copy this, copy 3 items, and put it into a new folder called Node React MongoDB app. So let's go in here and paste it in. You can also get all of my files here if you go to my GitHub under github.com/kodakai/node react tutorial, and you can copy the same files and follow along with this tutorial. But if you don't want to copy these files, it's totally fine. You can start a brand new project and I will show you how to do the database part, and you can probably pick it up through there. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is drag this whole Node React MongoDB app folder into my Visual Studio Code. And I will hold Control and tilde to open up my terminal down here because we need to go into that. And the first thing we'll be concentrating on is the back end. So before I get into the coding here, we need to set up our MongoDB database on the cloud. So let's go ahead and do that. I am going to head over to mongodb.com right here. MongoDB.com is a free website. It will allow you to create databases or collections. They're also called clusters, and everything here is free and it's totally fine to do testing on. So go ahead and click on try for free, but I already created an account, so I will log in through my account right now. Alright, so once you've created your account, you will see a screen that looks like this, and I will step you through the very important aspects of this first, and let's get you set up. The first thing that it might ask you to do is to create a cluster. If it asks you to create a cluster, go ahead and create one. Otherwise, there's a button over here called Create a New Cluster, because you will need to create a cluster first. But after you create that cluster, let's go down to Database Access so we can set up our permissions first. You'll notice that I have some logins already, but I will create a new one so you can follow along for this example project. So add new database user, and I suggest right now to use a password. For this example, I'm going to give this username Eagle Feng. And for the password, I'll show right here, Sensei. Now, I really suggest that you use this auto-generate secure password. I am setting it to read and write to any database for this one. Now, this is going to be a temporary user for me. I also love this aspect about it. I'm going to set it for 1 day so that I don't remember to remove this permission after I'm done with this project and upload this video. So I'm going to add the user. And the next thing I want you to do is to go down to network access right down here. You'll see that I added an entry for an IP address right here. So mongodb.com is very secure. They may not allow you to log in through your database access through our code if you do not add this IP address. I added this so that I can access this database from anywhere. So go ahead and copy the same thing right here. For the access list entry, put 0.0.0.0/0. And what this does is it allows anyone to log in through any IP. But if you would like to limit to your own IP only, go ahead and add your own IP address so that no one else can log in or try to log in. And that's going to do it for the security aspect of it. So let's go back to clusters. Now click on this connect button right here. And it has a couple of connection options. Go ahead and select connect your application. And what we want to do right now is copy this string right here. We will need this for our coding so that we can connect to this database. So go ahead and click Command Copy and open up a text pad. I like to do this, create a new document, and then I'm going to paste in this string right here. And we'll go back to this in a minute. I'll just minimize it right now. And once we get to our coding, we'll add in that string. Now here's the fun part. Let's go to the collections next. You notice that I created my cluster called Node Cluster. You can call it anything that you want. And you notice that I created a couple of databases already. They also will give you a lot of sample databases so that you can look through them. I really suggest looking at the sample mflix as an example to see how to create tables in here, or otherwise called collections and documents. But we will be creating our own database right now for our project, for our Twitter clone project. If you remember from our previous project, we were doing a Twitter thing. So go ahead and click on create database right now. And I'll be calling this node Twitter clone. And for the collection name, right now I'm only going to create a users table to give you an example. So you'll see right here, it created my node Twitter clone with a users collection. And if I wanted to create another collection, I can click on this plus right here. So go ahead and do that, because we also need another collection called tweets. So go ahead and create that. These are basically tables, if you remember from MySQL type tables. Just think of these as tables. Now for the users, I'm going to insert some documents. So with MongoDB, it uses a thing called documents, and I really suggest that you read up on MongoDB, Mongoose Database, and how to use documents. But what I'll be doing with this tutorial is stepping you through all of the basics, and you should get a handle of things once you see this whole tutorial. But right now we'll do an insert document, and you see right here, it automatically generated me an ID. Because if you worked with MySQL database tables, you'll know that we always need an ID with every table. Right now I'm going to create something called a username field, and I will give it a username of Coder Kai. And then if you click down here at this plus sign, you can add another field right under username. And I'm going to give this a name of full name. And this will be a full name of Coder Kai, just like that. And then also I will create another one called entry date. And right over here, you notice there's selections for what data type it is. I'm using string for both of these, but for this entry date, I'm going to select a data type of timestamp. So every time a new entry comes in, it will automatically timestamp this for me. So let's insert this right now. And there we go. I have my first document data inside my table users right here. And you'll notice that it generated me an object ID. So this is very important. I'll step through it in a minute when we are inserting documents into this table. So that's all we're going to do with the MongoDB right now. I wanted to show you how to add things into the table, but for the rest of this tutorial, I'll be doing it through coding on inserting data and retrieving data. So let's jump into that. Okay, so back inside our Visual Studio Code, and right now in my terminal, I want to cd into my backend folder right here, because we are in the main folder. You'll see right here, I listed out back end and front end, so I want to cd into our back end. And first off, I want to show you my Node version. So here's Node-V version 15.10. And I'll also show you my NPM version, npm.v, and is 7.5.3. So now that I'm inside the back end folder, I need to install our Mongoose database. And what we do is type npm install --save mongoose. So I'm installing this into the backend folder. I will also need to install something called a .env. So do a npm install .env. And if we check out our package.json right here, you'll notice that I have .env version 8.2 and Mongoose version 5.12. The next thing I want you to do is inside of backend, create a new file. And we are going to call this .env. So a .env file. And this is an environment file that we can access. So now going back to the connection text file right here with our connection database string, go ahead and copy that. And then inside of our .env file, I'm going to give it a db_URI with our string. And let's fill out this string right now. Right here is asking for our username. So this is the user that we created called EagleFang. And the password, Sensei. Now it's accessing my cluster right here. Yours will be different. And then right here where it says my first database, this is where we need to add in Node Twitter clone, because that is the new database that we set up. Right down here, I'll also create something called a port and give it 4000. And I'll show you how to use this right now. Let's save this file. And then let's open up our index file inside the backend. All right, so let's include our Mongoose database. Const mongoose equals require. That's right, mongoose. And then we also going to require the .env config. So this will include the .env file that we created down here. You just have to type it like that. You'll notice that inside of the .env file, I gave it a port 4000. So let me show you how to configure this now. Instead of telling it, const port like that, I can now access that environment variable by saying process.env.port. Or if it can't find it, we'll just add 4000 to it. So that's how we access parameters that we set inside our environment file right here. So let's go ahead and set up the Mongoose database. Right down here, db connection. And how we access it is by calling mongoose.connect process.env.db URI. So that's the string. And for the rest of this, you can just copy it how I'm typing it. We give that true and use unified. There we go, true. This is not something that you'll need to remember. Just go ahead and copy and paste it. Then, so if it made the connection, I'm going to console log this and say db connected to let us know that the database successfully connected. Now, if it didn't, I'm going to catch that error. Arrow function. Let's close that up and console log that as well. Error. Let's go ahead and save that, and there you go. You successfully connected to our Mongoose database. So this environment file is now done, so I'm going to close it out. And what I'll do is I have some other database connection code that I will paste in here. It's not really necessary right now, but what I'll do is I'll paste this in so that if you're working on a production code, you can use this, and this is how it uses it in production. But right now we're not in production, so I'm going to comment it out, but I will leave this in the coding for you to access and use if you are building this code for production. And how it knows if it's in production, I have an environment right here called node environment. So I forgot to add that in. Let's do node environment right here, node env equals, and we're just going to call this dev right now. So if you're going into production, just go ahead and put production like that, and it will know to pick it up. So right now we're just in development. So save this, close it back out. But right now I'm going to comment it out because we're not using it. And that's going to do it for the index.js. Go ahead and close that up. So let's go ahead and test out our server right here to make sure that it's making a connection. So npm run server. And right down here it says server is running on port 4000 and the database is connected. So we are fine with that. Go ahead and cancel out this. Next up, go up here and I want you to create a folder inside backend called models. And inside models, I'm going to create a file called schemas.js. And inside the schema file, I need to define our data structure for our tables, users, and tweets that we created. So in here, let's include the mongoose. And let's also create the schema. So that's how we defined that. And right now I'm going to set up the user schema. So let's do a const user schema. And we're going to do a new schema. And I like to close this up. And right in here, that's right, we're going to define our fields. We have a username, and this is a type string, and it is required. So anytime we create a new user, it is required to have a username. Right down here, full name. This is also a type string. And I don't have to make this required, but I will make it required just If you don't want to, you can just omit this and just have it a type string. And then we have an entry date. And this is a type date. And right here, I can make it default to the current date .now. So anytime a new user is added, it will add the current date and time to it. You'll notice that I didn't create a field called ID, and you've seen that when we created that new user table inside Mongoose, and it is an object ID because this will automatically be created. Every document we create, Mongoose will create an ID for it. Next, let's do a const tweet scheme, and that is a new schema. Close it up, and we just have a tweet in here, and that is a type string, and it is required. And I'm going to do this down here. I'm going to call this user. This is a type schema dot types dot object ID, and let me explain this. It's referencing the users table. So what am I doing here? If you worked with MySQL tables, you notice that you will need to do some inner joins and joining tables together. So basically, when I am going to query my tweets, I am going to reference that to a user. And at any time this user gets an updated username or their name, it will just reference that table. So this is how we do it. It's the same thing as if you remember SQL syntax. It's like select, from A, and then you do an inner join, B on, A dot ID equals B dot ID. So it's that same concept right here, where I'm joining this together to reference the user. And same thing, you notice that there's no ID up here. It will create it on its own. And that's right, anytime we reference a table, it is using the object ID of that table. So that automatically gets generated by Mongoose. And you see we're referencing it through the ID. And then down here, let me do a const users. Notice that I'm using uppercase here for users. This is a different variable here, and I'm calling it mongoose.model users. This is the name that I'm giving it, user schema. I'm referencing this user schema right here and calling it users. And now I also need to create one called tweets. And I'm going to reference the model for the tweet called tweet schema. Tweets. And then now I'm going to do this down here, and I'll explain why. My schemas equals users, and I'm calling the users right here, this name right here, and I'm telling this to be tweets, and I'm calling the tweets. So why am I doing this right here? When I first worked with schemas, I didn't know how to export multiple schemas. And so I found out how to do it by combining it into a variable called myschemas. And then now you can do a module dot exports equals myschemas. Otherwise, you can only export one. So that's how you get around it. You can create multiple models now of these schemas, put it together under one, and just export that. So go ahead and save this. We are done with our data structure. I'll keep this open as I move on to our handler here. So you'll remember that we created a routes handler. Go ahead and open that file up. And inside our handler, you'll see that we have a tweets. And this is just URL routing for our handler. And we have an add tweet. So guess what? We're going to populate our add tweet now. And I'll create a few functions to show you how to insert and then to retrieve. So let's get into this. Okay, so to start off, we need to include the schema, of course. So let's const schemas equals require. And let's go to our models folder here, schemas.js. Now I'm going to create a new router right here. Let's do a router.get. And this will be add users. Add user. Request response arrow function. Let's close it up. And if you remember earlier, I manually added a user inside our user table right here. I manually added Kodakai right here. but right now I want to show you how to add it through code. So I'm going to create this right here, and I'll just give a string right here, user equals username. It's going to create this object called equalFang and full name Sensei Johnny, because I'm going to add this into the user. Let's do a const new user equals new schema dot users. So right here we have our users, and I'm going to insert the user right here. That's what I'm inserting into the new user. And so let's do our insert. For this, I'm going to try it, and I'm going to do a wait on this because we need to make sure that it goes in there, and we need to wait for it. New user dot save, and this is going to be an async error new user result arrow function, and let's close that up. So since I am doing an await right here, you notice that I need to declare it as an async, so I also need to declare it up here as asynchronous right here. When it's been created, I'll just console log it and say new user created, and then I'm going to respond dot end on this. And this will show to our screen right here and end the process. Now we also need to catch any errors, and if there's an error, I'll just console log it for now, and also response.end user not added to let myself know that something went wrong. There we go. And I think I also forgot a bracket right here. There we go. And let's see here, I also have an extra bracket right there. Remove that. Sorry about that, guys. Always check your typing for syntax errors. Save that up. I believe I have no problems now. And let's do a Npm Run Server. And here we go. Database is connected. Let's open up our browser, and it is 4000 for our backend. And so let's call up add user. And there you go, new user created. How do we know? Let's go to our Mongo database here, and let's refresh the users table here. And there you go. You'll see that we added through coding a new user, equalFang and Sensei Johnny. So that's how you insert users using the back-end coding. Let's close out this server right here. And so this was only an example to show how to insert it. So I'm going to comment this out right now, and then I'm going to focus now on inserting tweets and retrieving the tweets, and I'll also create a tweet form where we can submit the tweet and it'll insert it into our tables for us. So I'm going to scroll down here, and if you remember, I have this router post right here called add tweet, and we haven't added anything to it. So let's go down here and add to it. And what I'm going to do is, if you notice up here how I did a add user, you notice that this was a get, and it was just a simple static way for me to add a user. You notice that I created a string with my user, but now we're going to add it through a post. And you'll see in a minute, I will create a form with a simple input box for a tweet with a send button. And when that button sends the tweet, it will send to this router right here to post it. And so I will grab that by saying const user tweet equals request the body, and I'm going to get the tweet input field, because I'm going to call that input field tweet input. The name of that will be tweet input. So this is the same for forms if you worked with it before through HTML and other ways of posting a form. And then now, since I got this tweet input, I can do the same thing like adding a user, but this time adding a tweet. So let's const new tweet equals new schemas dot tweets. Close it up. And inside here we have our tweet, right? So now we're using the user tweet. So it'll populate it with that. And guess what? We also have a field in here to link the user that's tweeting it, right? I am going to call this that field right here, because I'll show you right here how I'm going to link the user ID right here, the user ID parameter, because we need to grab that user. And I'll show you right now how to grab a user in our database. So I'll go back to our schema right here, and you'll notice that inside our tweet schema, I have a field called user, and that references the users table right here through the ID. So I'm going to use this right here through our tweet schema, the user, and that's why I'm calling it right here, user, and I'm telling it where to find that user by its ID. But I haven't gotten this ID yet, so let me get it right now, and I will do a const user ID equals, and I need to do an await for this because I need to grab it and wait till it gets it. So, and I'm going to do a find one. This is a Mongoose function to find a document inside our database. So I am going to find, you can use any of the fields here. I'm going to find it by username, and I'm going to find my username called Kodakai, and then I'm going to execute that. So this right here simply looks into our user database table, and it's finding a username called Kodakai, and it's returning that ID for me. So if I go to my user table right here, it will find the username Kodakai, and it will return this ID right here, this object ID for me, because that ID is linking to our tweet's user table. So now that this retrieved the user ID for me, I can populate it to this user right here. And so you'll see that everything is now linked up with a tweet and who tweeted that. Now you can also ask, why am I manually adding this in? Well, in a real life situation, when you're creating an application for a tweet page, I'll show you later on when the whole program runs. If you think about it like Twitter, you're logged in through Twitter, and Twitter is holding this ID for you already, so it knows who you are. But in my example here, I haven't created a login where it's saving that ID for me to reference. So I'm just pulling it right now through this username. But think of it in a real life situation where you're logged in and you already have this ID, and you can just simply populate the ID to link the user together. So let's go now and try to add it. And I will do an await on this. New tweet.save. And it has an error and new tweet results. Arrow function. And remember, this is asynchronous, so I need to add async up here. Now, if there's an error, I'll just do a simple response.end on and say error. Saving. Otherwise, I will redirect our page back to the tweets page. And I will end that. You have to make sure that the page ends after you redirect it. And then let's catch any errors. And same thing, I'll just console log it if it has an error. And I'll just also redirect it back to the tweets page. And response.end. After I've added this right here, you notice that I haven't defined user yet, so let's add that in. Let's do a const user equals schemas.user. Users. There you go. So now that is defined there. But you know, I will also modify this right here to now grab our tweets, because this is static right here from our previous example. So let's just remove all this. Let's remove our old code. Okay, let's modify our tweets here. And we know that this is also going to be an asynchronous function. So let's just add async right here. And let's const tweets equals schemas dot tweets. We need to reference that schema right here, our tweet. And then I'll give you some tips right here. If you are only going to query one table, it will be like this: user tweets equals await tweets dot find, open and close bracket, and then catch the error, and it will return the tweet data. Then I'll do an if error throw error. Otherwise, if there's a tweet data, and I'm gonna make it really simple, I'm going to do a response.end JSON.stringify and just return that tweet data so I can use it in our front end and parse it through. Else down here, response.end, and I'm just going to end it if there's an error. And of course, you should do a little bit more better on this error checking right here. This is just very simple right now. So let me explain this right now. You know that when you're selecting from a table, let's use SQL again as an example. You're doing a select from table, right? And you're not doing any joins. If you're selecting everything from that table, it will return you everything from that table. But in our case here, our tweet also has the user that's referencing it, that's attached to that. We need to know who the user is that's tweeting it, right? So I can't use this right here. I will change this now to user tweets equals await tweets.find open and close bracket. But now I'm using this function called populate. And I wanted to populate the user because that's what I'm calling it right here, user. I wanted to, every time I select from this tweet table, to get all the tweets, but I wanted to also populate who the user is and reference that table. So how you do that is kind of like a join, where you're doing a join table, A on B, right? So it's the same thing as that, but I'm telling it to join this table user, get all that, and then I execute it. And then that will return error and the tweet data. Just like that. So now when this queries our table and finds all of my tweets, it will automatically add in the user associated with that tweet. Okay, so we're done with these gets and posts right here for the tweets and add tweet. So I'm going to move on to the front end right now and tie it together and show you the final results. Okay, so let's minimize this back end folder, and now we're going into front end right here, but I'll leave these files open. And inside front end, you'll remember inside of our source right here, we have components and we have the tweets.js file. So let's open that up, because this tweet is the page that was showing us our tweets, right? And if you remember how it worked, is that it fetches the tweet from the backend through our handler here. It fetches it, and then it iterates through it using the map function. But now that we're pulling everything from the database, I'm going to change some of this right here. Right up here under section, I'm going to create a form now. Let's do a form method equals post, and action equals add tweet. That's right, we are going to add a tweet form here. Inside our tweet form, there's going to be an input. That's a type text. And the name right here, this is important. This is called tweet input. And let me show you in a minute here. Let's do the input type equals submit. We need the submit button. The value equals send. So we have two input fields right here. We have one for the text to enter in our tweet, and then we have the send button. And I'm calling it tweet input. So if we go back to handler here, you'll remember that inside add tweet here, this is where the tweet input comes from, because I'm grabbing that from the body of it. I'm grabbing that input field here to use. So that's why we're calling it that. Now, sorry about this, guys, because I am going to add some bootstrap coding to this to pretty it up. but you don't need to if you just want to run this how it is. It will just look a little bit funky for you guys, but I have a little bit of Bootstrap code that I want to add to it. And this is just only going to pretty it up for me. And I will also include this in my GitHub if you want to look through it. But yeah, basically this is just Bootstrap code to make it look a little bit more pretty. Bootstrap is a very nice thing to look into and learn because it makes things so much more simple to pretty it up instead of doing extensive CSS around all of these fields. So that is my Bootstrap right here. I have a container and I added a header so that we can see that the page is called tweets. And this is just a form with an input button and an input text field. And then down here, I need to modify this to match up with our new fields that we entered into the database. So with my old Bootstrap here, I'm going to remove this Bootstrap code right here, and I'll pretty it up a little bit more. But I'll just show you right here with what we're changing this to, because we are iterating through our schema right here with our new data fields right here. I'm now going to put everything on one line, and I'll call item dot, we have a user dot full name, right? User dot full name through the item, because when we map it out, you'll look at our database here, and inside the user, it has full name. So that's how I'm referencing it, through user, item dot user dot full name. So that's what I love about this map. It just remaps everything very easy for you to reference. And right in here, I'll just say item.user.username. That's how I reference that. You'll see how this is formatted when I'm done. And then we want to show the tweet. And now the tweet is inside just item.tweet, right? And you see how simple that is. Let me just format this a little bit nicer. I'm going to make this, and I'm just going to add some Bootstrap code into this. So I'll be right back. And then delete my old code here, and you'll see that I have my new Bootstrap code in here to make it look a little bit nicer. All I'm doing is a row padding on it, and then I'm using these alert boxes with a rounded peel effect on it, and I'm just adding some little icons right here. So you'll see in a minute when I run it, and it looks a little bit nice. Let's save up this file, and now we can run our front end and back end. So let me show you the final product right here. I'll add some tweets and everything. Down in our terminal here, I'm going to initiate the backend server now. I'm inside the backend folder. So I'm going to say Npm Run Server. Our backend is running right here. Database is connected. And if you remember, we can add another terminal right here. And I will cd into our front end. And now I'll do npm start for the front end. That's how you initiate the front end server. And you also notice that I prettied it up a little bit here. The links are up here now. Now let's take a look at our tweets page right here. You notice that we have no tweets in our database table right now. So I'm going to add one. I'm going to say I love Node.js. And let's send that off. And there you go. You see it added the tweet for us. So this is the formatted code that I have in the front end. Let me show you again, where I have the full name, username, and the tweet. And it's just formatted using Bootstrap. So here is the full name, username, tweet. And then if I go to our Mongo database right here, I'm going to go to our tweets table here. And you'll see right here it added to it. You'll see the tweet field. It have the string. And take a look at this. User is an object ID that references this object string right here. See this object string 604F25 at the end. Let's go back to users here. And here it is, 604F25 string. So if I add another tweet with this different user, it will have this object ID for it. But you'll remember that through our handler here, I'm forcing it to find my username. So let's step through all of this one more time. I created a form with an input field and a button that when I submit, it is this form right here with an input name of tweet input. And when that submits, it's sending it to this add tweet page. Where's this add tweet page? It's in the handler. the handler has the add tweet URL right here. And what it's doing is that it's looking for the user first. And remember, if we're just like Twitter, we got to log in first to get our ID, but I'm telling it to look up my ID using the username. So I'll show you right here. I'll modify this to be eaglefang for the username. And so now if I save this, it will look up that username when I tweet and reference that user with the tweet. And what it's doing is it's setting up the schema for it, the definition right here that we defined through this tweet. And then it's going to try to save it to our database and then redirect us back to the tweets page right here, the tweets URL. So let's give it another shot here. Let's go back here. And now if I send off another tweet, it will send it as eaglefang, all right? So let me do it right here, quiet. And there you go. You see how it just referenced the new one because I told it to look for the eaglefang user. Sensei Johnny, quiet. Quiet! So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this very intuitive tutorial right here. This should complete this project for our Node React project using MongoDB. I think with the next one, I will step you through using another one called Express Handlebars to do everything's very similar. It's just the front end is different because React is a different front end how you're coding it. Pretty much React is using this front end right here with this syntax. But there's another one that I love using. It's called Express Handlebars. I love using that one more. The syntax is a little bit better, but that's more for the front end. But if you're looking to learn MongoDB, how to do all of the databases, I really recommend using this mongodb.com to use the clusters with it. Read up on collections and documents, how this works. Try to use some of these examples down here to do some joins because I showed you the basics. Look up Mongoose functions on how to add, remove, update, delete things, save. And I showed you the basics that a lot of people are using. That's very useful here on saving something, on finding it and populating it by joining tables. So just do some practice on this and you should get a handle of it. But this was a very fun project to do for a very simple tweet clone. And this project is pretty much complete. I hope everyone enjoyed this coding project right here. Please give this video a like and subscribe to it because it actually motivates me to create a lot more programming videos for you guys. And I'll see everyone in the next project. Code Kai out.